Hey guys, it's Miss Loving, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing some information and giving some demos about the basics of how to work with clay. We're going to be touching on topics such as how to shape clay to make sure that it's hollow, how to attach items on clay, how to use glaze, and how to store clay. We're going to touch on a few other topics, but I want to start by saying that we are all going to work on these boards during class. These boards help ensure that we keep our area clean and that we have a place to store the clay later. So everybody should be using one of these boards. One of the most important rules to know about clay is that clay needs to be completely dry before it can be fired in the kiln. If it's not completely dry, then it'll either explode or break within the kiln. So you really want to ensure that it's dry, and the best way to do this is by ensuring that your clay is no thicker than about an inch. For example, this sphere that I'm holding, this is my project. I don't want to put it in the kiln like this because since it's a solid ball, it is way too thick. It's going to take way too long to dry. So what I'm going to want to do instead is I'm going to want to hollow out this sphere. And I'm going to show you guys how you can make a hollow object using clay. There's a lot of different ways to make a clay object hollow. However, for our example here, what I'm going to be doing, since we're making a sphere, is I'm going to make these two kind of bowl-shaped objects. And then once I have my two bowl-shaped objects, I'm going to put them together, and they will kind of create this round sphere shape that is still hollow inside. Kind of like imagine if you were to put two cereal bowls together, it would be empty inside, but still have this round shape on the outside. So what I'm doing here is I'm pressing my thumb into the clay to give it the kind of concaved shape of the bowl, and then I'm pinching upwards on the walls of the bowl, and I'm gonna keep repeating this motion, just pressing and pinching until I have my desired shape. And I'm also gonna kind of use my fingers to smooth out the outside just to make it look a lot nicer. Once I finish making my two halves, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the two pieces together so they make a whole sphere. However, I can't just put them together because they're not going to stick. I have to score them. Scoring, this is extremely important for you guys to know because you cannot attach any objects of clay together without scoring them first. Scoring basically means is if you can see here, I'm scratching the area that is going to be attached to another area. I'm just creating these like marks, these lines. I'm just like scratching it up as much as I can. And once I finish scratching it up, then I can finally join the clay together. If you don't score it, if you don't scratch it like this first, the clay will not stick together and it will fall apart in the kiln. So now that I've scored it, I can finally press the two objects together. So now that we've joined our pieces together, we have our shape, yet we have this kind of seam here that I don't want to keep. So what I'm gonna do is you can either use a tool or you could use your fingers, and we are going to be blending the clay. To blend the clay means to kind of move around the clay in order to smooth it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna be smoothing out the clay. I'm gonna be blending it together so that it joins from looking like two pieces into looking like one piece. And so yeah, I'm just moving the clay around and smoothing it out so that we get rid of that seam there. And I am just going to do this all the way around. Okay, so now that I have blended the clay together and it is one consistent piece, I still not happy with how smooth it is. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just take a little bit of water, and I am going to use my fingers, or you could use a tool if you'd like, to just go through and try to smooth out any bumps or imperfections. Just try to make it as smooth as you desire. Alright, so now I am all done shaping and smoothing out my object so that it has its desired shape and texture. However, I'm not done quite yet. It's not ready to be dried yet because since my object is hollow, it needs to have a hole in it, because if you don't put a hole in a hollow clay object, it could explode in the kiln. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a tool. You can either use a sharp tool or you can use a kind of like rounded tool like this. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put the object straight into the clay, just through one side of the clay. You don't want to put it through both sides. It only needs to go in one side. And I am just going to put the tool in there, and I'm just going to create a hole. Alright, so now that I've added a hole, if I wanted to be done with the project here, I could be all done. I'm just going to leave this out to dry, and then after a few days or maybe a week, once the project is completely dry, then it would be ready to go in the kiln. However, right now I'm going to show you guys what you're going to do in order to store your project if you aren't finished. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you are going to take your project and you're going to spray it with water. So now once you've sprayed your project, you are going to put your project inside a plastic bag, board and all. You're going to put the board and the project inside the bag. And this is just to ensure that moisture stays within the project, because once clay dries out, you can't work with it anymore. So we got to make sure that it stays moist. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the openings of the bag underneath the board just to make sure that there's no openings, no areas where air can get into the bag, because like I said, we do not want the project to dry out. Once it dries out, it is not workable anymore. And then we always want to make sure that we get a wet paper towel once we're done sculpting, and we clean up the table and the area around us. So lastly, we're going to be learning about glaze. Glaze is what we use to color ceramic objects after they come out of their first firing in the kiln. And something I want you guys to pay attention to is a lot of times glaze is not the color that it looks like in the bottle. So notice how this bottle, the glaze is blue. Look at the label. It says that this glaze is actually white. So please make sure you're reading the labels. Please make sure you're paying attention to what color the bottle says it is and not what it looks like. Now that I've read the label and I know that I have the color that I want, I'm going to take my paintbrush and I'm going to go ahead and paint a layer of glaze onto my objects. Notice here how I am purposely avoiding putting glaze on the bottom of my sculpture. The reason for this is because if you put glaze on the bottom of your sculpture, it is going to stick to the kiln when it's fired. So please make sure that there is no glaze on the bottom of your sculpture while you're glazing. Once you finish painting that first layer, you're going to paint on 2 more layers. So that means you should have 3 layers of glaze on in total. And once it's all dry like this, then you are ready to put it in the kiln for its final fire. I'm excited to see what all you guys create. Let's get started.